It's kind of like the one book that puts it all together. You can't cover everything in one book, but in this one book it covers 4 chapters of what happened on the day itself. And then 4 of the chapters which are the background to what happened that day. If you go through this one, you've kind of covered the issue. You can decide for yourself whether you want to pursue it more deeply or whether that does enough for you or not. The first chapter is about the alleged hijackers. At least 10 of the people have had somewhere in the world some major newspaper saying that they were alive after 9/11. I mean, they raise their hand and say, "I'm alive after 9/11." So at least one, Yoryevrah, the pilot of the Flight 93, who we haven't heard of since that day, but nevertheless there is at least 2 or 3 different pictorial versions of supposedly the same individual, which means it's not the same individual. In other words, there's 2 or 3 versions which are portrayed in this book, in our book, of what of a picture of him, like a passport picture, a family picture or whatever, and they're not the same people. We have 9 pictures, and there's at least 2 different or 3 different individuals in those 9 pictures. So it looks like he's been duplicated. In other words, there's a duplicate person who is portraying himself as having been involved. Whether he was on the plane or not, in any version, we don't know.
This is one of those cases where the pictures really do tell the story, that sort of the most horrifying aspect of this particular crash scene is how little debris is visible. There is a large crater in the ground, and I'm hoping that you all are seeing it as I'm talking about it, but that's really all you see is a large crater in the ground and just tiny, tiny bits of debris.
The second chapter is on insider trading that occurred before 9/11. That was written by myself. And it also deals with whether the planes took off and whether hijacking occurred. And that's kind of like the only part of the official story that I would accept, namely planes did take off. Whether they, and I think they did have people who were involved with somehow interfering with the flight of the plane, somehow. I call them hijackers if you want, but I'm not in any way saying it was the list of the hijackers that the government provides are the correct list, nor am I even saying that those people were involved in getting the plane into the towers or into the Pentagon. I mean, they may have just been on the plane doing some other activity which could lead people to think that they were actually flying planes into towers, but didn't actually do that. Which then raises the issue about how those planes could have gone into the towers. And I will only say that I don't know, but I give the possibility of some remote control equal standing to the possibility, or even more standing than the possibility that an actual human being flew the planes into the towers. Next chapter is by Ray Griffin, who's probably the most well-known author on 9/11, and his basic point is the towers were demolished, and comes in with evidence from firefighters who were alive afterwards and recorded things that they experienced during that day, and in the next couple of days afterwards, and analyzed their statements.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
as if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
The following chapter is about the lack of air defenses for any of those planes. Some people say this is the easiest thing for people who have no knowledge about 9/11 to begin with. How come our air defenses didn't work even when some of these planes were in the air an hour and 40 minutes after the very first plane crashed into a tower? How could that possibly have happened?
Except for medical emergency, U.S. military, law enforcement.
When interceptions of hijacked planes is protocol. I mean, you have to do it, and you have to interfere, and they didn't. Well, how could that possibly have happened? And were there military exercises that occurred that day, which were not a coincidence, which were in fact designed to avoid having fighter pilots in the air being able to interfere with these planes. Another very well-known author on 9/11, Mr. Ahmed. This particular aspect of it is the interconnection between Western intelligence agencies and 9/11. He's pretty careful about using the word alleged as he goes through, but he nevertheless makes an analysis of the relationship between Al-Qaeda and Western intelligence operations and comes to the conclusion that basically they're so closely intertwined that you really can't separate them. So that would suggest that if you hear the word Al-Qaeda on the TV tomorrow night, you think Western intelligence. And you think, what might Western intelligence be doing, but portraying it as if Al-Qaeda, something separate from Western intelligence, is doing something perhaps Islamic, as they portray it. Okay, but anyway, he presents the evidence for that. Then there's another chapter by David MacGreggor, which analyzes what he calls a Machiavellian state terrorism. People know what Machiavelli was as a political theorist. And the issue he raises is that Machiavellian state terrorism is just another Machiavellian action of trying to convince citizens in their own country that they have an enemy out there, and that it can happen in Italy, it can happen in Germany, it can happen in France, it can happen in the United States, it can happen in Canada. And then the next chapter is analyze the 9/11 Commission report, and the focus around that is about not so much what they said, but who were they, and not going through all of them, but focusing, for example, on Philip Zelikow as the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, to realize that these individuals were not independent individuals. They were intimately connected to the government. The 9/11 Commission didn't deal with any of the hijackers except to name them, but never addressed the question that like up to 11 of them were alive after 9/11, reported by BBC, The Independent, LA Times. Why didn't you interrogate all that issue of hijackers being alive after 9/11?
We actually looked into those allegations, and I think if you actually dig into the underlying data underneath the citations you've heard about, there's no there. The hijackers did not survive those plane crashes. We actually looked into those allegations, and I think if you actually dig into the underlying data underneath the citations you've heard about, there's no there. The hijackers did not survive those plane crashes.
The final chapter is by Diana Rolfe from the University of Ottawa, who analyzes the question of Islamophobia as a background to the whole operation of blaming 9/11 on Middle Eastern activists. As an example of one of the chapters, Diana Rolfe, so I'm reading now from the initial hardcover edition, and I'm just read one paragraph of her abstract, so it gives you a flavor for what the chapter is. The war on terror has nothing to do with protecting the U.S. and world's peoples from terrorists, and everything to do with securing the American empire abroad and muzzling democracy and human rights at home. The 9/11 attacks were the pretext which sold the myth of evil Muslim terrorists imminently threatening the Americans. That tale allowed the Cheney-led members of the Project for the New American Century to implement their 1990 DPG plan for world control. The war on terror is modeled on Islamophobic stereotypes, policies, and political structures developed by the Israeli Likud and Bush Sr. in 1979. It is designed to inspire popular support for U.S. wars of world aggression.
To defeat this plan, we must overcome our Islamophobic fear of terrorists and stand in solidarity with Muslims.